Okay, so I just did the Mendelian Inheritance of Immunodeficiency Disorders. Okay, when I first jumped at this passage, I saw pedigree charts and realized, okay, yeah, total classical genetics approach to this question. My strategy tends to be to go down to the question first to see, especially when you have something like a pedigree chart as a figure, you think they're going to be asking questions directed to these pedigree charts. So the first question here is based on the pedigree analysis, what type of Mendelian inheritance does Bruton syndrome most likely exhibit? So they want to know the inheritance pattern. The first thing that you think of when you see pedigree charts and inheritance pattern is X-linked or autosomal. That's why they always show squares and circles, squares being male, circles being female. So I'm looking at Bruton's, which is figure 1, and I'm starting at the top. I see a male who is not affected and a female who is affected. So far, this doesn't tell us anything. Typically, you would, if you're thinking sex-linked, you would assume the males would be more likely to be exhibiting whatever the syndrome is. And in this case, we've got a female who's exhibiting it. So that's kind of maybe a knock against sex-linked, but we're not quite there yet. Okay, so we move on to the second generation there, and we see two males, the two sons, both exhibited the syndrome. The daughter did not. So that really starts to flip my opinion and make me think, oh, maybe the mother had two recessive X chromosomes carrying this syndrome trait allele, and she passed that on to the two sons, who they only got their X chromosome from their mother. And if this thing was like a recessive X-linked trait, then the sons would only get that, and then they would have to exhibit the problem because they would get the Y chromosome from their father. But the daughter would only get one of those from the mother and then get a normal one from the father, leaving her heterozygous and not exhibiting, but being a carrier. This is further explained as you go down to the next generation and you look at that female 4 that is a putative carrier of the allele, crossing with male number 3, which we have to assume at this point, if we're going on this X-linked recessive like pattern, that male has to be normal X and a Y. And this would make sense that you could get something like male number 8, where if the female 4 was just a carrier, the mother of that male was just a carrier, then that one male could have gotten a normal X and then a Y from the dad. And then male number 10, who is also the son of that female 4, could have gotten the diseased X and then a Y from the dad. Where the daughter, female 9, could have gotten a normal allele from mom and a normal allele from dad, or a diseased allele from mom and a normal allele from dad. Either way, she's not going to exhibit it, and she's just going to carry. So the answer to this one, I think, is X-linked recessive. Cool, that's correct. Okay, question 2. Hyper IgE syndrome shows an autosomal recessive pattern of inheritance. Okay, so they told us this already. Based on the pedigree analysis in figure 2, which member of the family is most likely not a carrier? Okay, so hyper IgE syndrome, figure 2, autosomal recessive. So they tell us it's autosomal recessive. We don't have to guess. So that means that on that first generation, when we're looking at 1 and 2, we know that 2 must have 2 copies of a recessive allele, and 1 could have either none or it could have 1 and be heterozygous, but just not presenting any of the symptoms, or the syndrome rather. So when you look at the next generation, at the kids, 2 males and a female, well, once again, at this point, they already told us it's autosomal recessive, so the male-female thing wouldn't really matter. So you have 3 kids, and you see that one of them is not affected, but 2 of them are. If 2 of them are, and this thing is autosomal recessive, then that means that they got 1 bad one from mom, and they had to get 1 bad one from dad. So dad could have 1 bad one and have 1 good one, which would make sense for the 2 diseased children. For the non-diseased child, male number 5, he could have gotten a good allele from dad and then just one bad allele from mom, but he was still fine because of the heterozygous dominant allele. So this question is asking which member of the family is most likely not a carrier. So we know that male 5 is, we know that male 1 is, we know that female 2 definitely is. Anything shaded in black is obviously a carrier. So basically the entire right side of this pedigree is kind of thrown out. So let's look at the next one in that second generation, male number 3. So if we know that female number 4 has to have 2 recessive alleles, then male number 3 can either be homozygous dominant or heterozygous. When you look at all the kids, none of them are exhibiting the symptoms, which tends to make you think that none of those kids were the cross of a heterozygous and a homozygous recessive parent, meaning that they're all heterozygous children. They're all carriers, but they only have one allele, which they got from mom. And you can just say statistically here, I don't know for sure, but I'm pretty sure it's just a statistical improbability that that male number 3 here would be heterozygous. I think it's like when you see 3 children who all don't exhibit the symptoms, you can pretty much guarantee that number 3 is going to be a homozygous dominant, therefore not a carrier. And that is the correct answer to this problem. All right, question number 3. In figure 1, what is the genotype of Bruton's tyrosine kinase allele in person number 4? All right, person number 4, they are the spawn of 1 and 2. So let's go back to 1 and 2. This is an X-linked recessive. Therefore, male number 1 has a dominant X and a Y, and female number 2 has 2 recessive X's. Therefore, if they had a daughter who pulled an X chromosome from both of them, you would have a daughter with a dominant X and a recessive X. Therefore, that female would have to be heterozygous. And the answer is this person has 1 normal and 1 diseased allele. And correct. And Khan Academy gives you that awesome little validation noise. Okay, question number 4. In figure 2, what is the most likely genotype of the STAT3 gene in person number 3? Okay, so figure number 2, person number 3. Oh, we were just talking about them. We said before that it's almost certain that this person has a homozygous dominant genotype, and that's how I answered it, but I kind of want to go through Khan's hints just to look at them. Okay, so the first hint. In autosomal inheritance, each offspring receives 1 allele from the father and 1 allele from the mother, right? In autosomal recessive diseases, an individual must have 2 diseased alleles in order to exhibit the phenotype, okay? None of the progeny of person number 3, which is the guy that we're talking about, and person number 4, which is the daughter who has 2 diseased recessive alleles. So none of their progeny exhibit the disease, even though each of the progeny had to have received one of the disease alleles from person number 4, the daughter who had the 2 diseased alleles. So obviously all the kids had to get one from there, which meant they did not get one from dad. So person number 3 has 2 normal alleles. I don't know how in-depth Khan is really getting with this, but with the MCAT, I think that they typically want you to just assume things like that. So that works for me, even though it might not be 100% accurate, but this works for me. All right, and then question number 5. If a female who has Bruton syndrome married a male who did not have the disease, what phenotypes would their progeny exhibit? So a female who has Bruton syndrome is X-linked recessive, therefore the female would have to be 2 diseased X chromosomes. The male did not have the disease, therefore he has 1 non-diseased X chromosome. What phenotypes would their progeny exhibit? So the answers here are kind of split up between males and females. Therefore, I like to do a Punnett square and just look at like what's the 50-50 on this. It's a very simple Punnett square, and when you roll it out, you see that all the males had to get one disease allele from mom, with the Y chromosome coming from dad. Therefore, they would exhibit the disease. And then all the females got one normal from dad and one disease from mom, and they didn't exhibit the disease. They only carried it. Therefore, the answer would be D. Well, it might be different for you, but the answer is at least 100% of the females will be normal, while 100% of the males will have Bruton syndrome. And cha-ching, got it.